I'm Vincent Adinolfi. I'm a game developer working on a game called Heartworm, which is a survival horror retro-inspired game taking inspiration from the genre classics, Silent Hill and Resident Evil, those types of games that we all remember, and trying to kind of emulate their visual style, but also trying to forge its own identity. It's about a girl trying to deal with death and kind of the emotions that come along with that by entering into an abandoned house in the mountains that supposedly has a way to contact the dead.
I downloaded the demo for Heartworm actually, and
Mhm.
replayed it actually fairly recently in preparation for our conversation here.
Mhm.
Something that struck out to me, and I think this is an interesting to talk about especially when it comes to classic survival horror. I noticed that there are two methods of play. There's the like a third-person camera that you can use for your weapon, and as well as the classic Resident Evil style, sort of just auto aim kind of combat. Can
Mhm.
you just like elaborate on like your thoughts behind implementing both of those styles in Heartworm?
Totally. Yeah. So that's sort of like part of the, wanting to do something inspired by these older games also came with some challenges to try and modernize them a little bit. Not everyone enjoys using tank controls. It's a pretty controversial topic, I've come to find out. But yeah, so I just wanted to like give as many options as I could to people. My intended way of playing is to use tank controls and the over the shoulder camera for combat. That was like from the beginning, that's how I had it set, like before I even made any other options. And that was just kind of like I wanted to put I don't know, I wanted to like I like the idea of fixed cameras. That's like, a core feature of the game. But I also, because the environments are full 3D, I wanted to give players the opportunity to just look around. And I was really inspired by Metal Gear Solid 2. You could they like unlike the first one, you could go into first person. And I remember when I played that when I was younger, I was like, "Oh, this is awesome! Like I can see all this stuff that I could never see before." Yeah, so that was like kind of the long-winded version of how that came to be, I guess.
Oh, awesome, and I always think, and I feel like many would agree with me, that like more choice in any video game to me is always a good thing, within reason, obviously. So with that being said, where did the concept for this game came from? You mentioned being inspired by classic survival horror, and I could see a couple playing this, but can you just give like sort of what was the genesis of Heartworm? Where did this come from?
I guess what I wanted to do from the beginning was, I mean, really at first I was just kind of messing around in like Unity and like with the prospect of like making a game. I didn't have like strong, like solidified ideas going into all of it. But I knew I wanted to make something within like the framework of survival horror. So I knew I wanted fixed cameras. I knew I wanted to do something with kind of like, like a horror theme. I wanted something that, I like I don't really like the campiness of Resident Evil so much, but I really like the atmosphere. I feel like even though it's kind of like cheesy as we look back at it, it still has this like really like I don't know, just like creepy like liminal feeling to a lot of it. And so like that was like I guess I like had all these like feelings that I wanted to explore, and then I kind of like built the story around that. And I draw a lot from personal experience too. Just like there's a lot of I grew up in like the suburbs, and I feel like there's a lot of like creepy, just like visuals in like within that. So a lot of the like levels are based on places that I grew up around, and just yeah, it's kind of like just a culmination of media and experiences that I've had that I kind of worked into this story to tell.
Right, and you know, and I can definitely see there's like I get that sense of Resident Evil. There's like a little more, I'd say, that vibe of Resident Evil 1 in present in Heartworm when, you know, walking through some of the environments. Some places are really quiet. Some like that main street in the demo is pretty like active with all the enemies walking around and with all the visuals happening. And I've noticed that this just this beautiful like collage of different experiences. So I get this, I get that sense of what you said just
Mhm.
now from just playing the demo, and I guess like to sort of lead into, you know, from survival horror. I can you just, you know, for people who maybe don't maybe not completely understand, why survival horror? You know, why do you think this is a genre that many people like to come back to and even take inspiration from when making these newer projects?
Yeah, and I feel like it definitely it's like there's a resurgence now too, like more so than ever before maybe, you know, I mean just like Silent Hill 2 remake, all that stuff. There's so yeah, I mean happy to explain why I think it's interesting at least is I think horror games recently have um you know, I mean, there are definitely some good ones out there, and I'm not, you know, I'm kind of casting generalizations right now, but there's a lot of, I don't know, they feel kind of cheap sometimes. It's like streamer bait or just like, you know, trying to like relying on jump scares and stuff like that. And I feel like these older games, they were kind of they're like adventure games that had horror elements and they also were kind of like puzzle games, and they just have like all of these like different qualities that all came together. And like I feel like survival horror as a name feels kind of, I don't know, like one note, but it really is like I think the genre is really broad. It, you know, I mean there's so like there are just so many directions you can go with those mechanics, like an adventure game that has puzzles, that has horror elements, that's following a narrative, and then that's not even getting to like the mechanics specifically of them. And yeah, I don't know, it just feels like a really broad canvas to make something with, and I think that's why it appeals to me as a developer. The breadth of games that they made under that genre name are all of the ones that I will probably replay until I'm not around anymore. So,
Yeah, and
um,
I agree with you there. For me, survival horror is such an iconic genre, even if maybe lately some of the some of more modern horror titles aren't like don't capture that same spirit of what came before. Because you're right, like Resident Evil, the series I always like to think is like they're like little puzzle boxes that you interact with and sort of pull. You're pulling kind of like switches or pressing buttons in this little box, and something happens and something changes, and you're presented with a new obstacle or a challenge. And I agree, there aren't many modern horror experiences in gaming that really capture that same feeling.
mhm.
And I do get that sense from Heartworm. That I do feel like it has a little of that, you know, that puzzle box feeling, along with the more exploratory elements of something like Silent Hill. Uh, so yeah, no, I totally agree with with what you're saying, and and yeah, it's why we like to come back to those things. It's interesting, and even replaying some of these older games here in 2024, it's you're just amazed at what they came up with within the limitations of the time too. So uh,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's very interesting. Uh, Something I like to talk about with, or that I've wanted to talk about with, actually, as far as interviews with developers are concerned, or just the development process, because you know a lot of people that don't really like maybe closely follow how video games are made listen to our show.
Mhm.
So can you just maybe give an insight on like the challenges of development of creating a video game? Like what would you say are like some of the hurdles of development?
It's hard to know where to start because there really are are so many challenges, and like even more than I expected, like when I started this. But you know that probably is just par for the course. I mean, it's my first game, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have not gone through this before, but um, what I am learning is that every part of the process is has like a number of challenges that um it's really just constantly like figuring out how to tackle one thing and move on to the next thing, and I mean, like anything else that's complicated, but I think what makes it particularly difficult is you're like using all of these different disciplines. Like you have to you're writing a story, but then you also have to develop the the gameplay just like mechanically, and then you have to program it and implement it, and you have to create all of the art assets, and you have to animate things, and it's just like there's so many different pieces, and they all have to come together perfectly. And honestly, the more and more I do this, the more I like sympathize when a game doesn't live up to people's expectations, because it feels like it is a small miracle that any game ever gets made and finished ever, to me, as time goes on.
Right.
So, yeah.
And no, I like I am not a developer, but I have like peeked in, and like into aspects of development because especially now as like an adult, I'm like 30, so I've I'm well past the age where people would think you'd play video games, but obviously that's not the case anymore. And
Right.
just
Yeah.
getting like even just brief insights of development, especially for some really famous games like Halo or Doom or like anything that is just now considered like a milestone in the industry. You see their process, and it's just nuts,
Yeah.
like how things went, especially like those Halo guys. They really like buckled down and worked really hard to get those three games out, and it's just insane to see all that effort. So uh yeah, it just seems like such a challenge. And having said all that, would you like recommend or encourage people to get into game development if they were interested, having experienced this so far with your first title?
Yeah, I mean, all of all of that said, and like all the challenges aside, I don't regret trying and doing this like for a moment. So like I've always wanted to do something like this. I mean, 10 years ago, I tried. I was a lot younger, and I didn't really, it felt like it was impossible. But the tools are a lot easier to use now. Things are just a lot of what we have available makes us more capable of actually completing projects like this. So I think if even if you have no experience, like I mean, like yeah, before I started this game, I effectively had zero experience. I had experience in other maybe related um, disciplines. Like I've always been interested in art, and I've always done other forms of art, and I had like light programming experience for my day job, and like I don't know. I just think, yeah, I think if it's something that you want to do, uh, you absolutely should try. Um,
Right, definitely. It's sort of with like any passion, with any sort of desire to create art. It is good to just kind of get into it, just give it a try, and really just put yourself out there in that regard. I do think with like everything we've talked about so far, I'm honestly really excited for Heartworm. I think it's a really cool project, and I think
thank
you're making something pretty special here. Honestly, I have a question that just came to mind in regards to this game. This is just because I'm curious. Like, well,
you.
why a camera? Just out of curiosity. Not This isn't a complaint. don't
Yeah,
don't
no.
misunderstand. But like, what made you want to give your main character a camera?
Yeah, so yeah, the camera is the weapon in the game, and I do I do get people asking this quite a bit, just because it is. I think one thing is um people who have played other games in the genre, like they associate it with Fatal Frame,
Hmm.
which was, that was the one of the only other like horror games where you use a camera as your weapon that I can think of. And I never played that game, so that it's not that. I'm just like putting that out there.
Of course.
But I actually started with a gun as the weapon, and it just didn't really feel like it made sense. And I'm into photography, just like I've always been into photography as like a hobby in general, and I was like, well, like a camera like mechanically like feels the same as a gun in like the context of a game. Like you're aiming it, it requires like that dexterity, um and it just felt like it fit more thematically with like the game. Like, I mean, you're exploring kind of like some I don't know, like deeper emotional things, and like it just didn't really make sense to have the character like pull out, a machine gun and start like blasting away like so yeah.
So with like that being said, now that we're coming to the end of our conversation, with that expectation, you mentioned it being an emotional game. What can players expect from Heartworm when they pick it up this coming year?
um yeah, I mean, I think like, it sometimes it's hard for me to try and sell my own game here, but it I think if you just like are looking for maybe a deeper horror or mystery or just gaming experience in general, and I don't even think you necessarily have to have played any of the older stuff that I'm inspired by. I just think, yeah, if you want a game that hopefully has an engaging story, and you value like exploration, and you enjoy being rewarded for exploration, um, and you don't mind maybe being scared like a little bit, but I don't think it's that scary. So yeah, yeah, I don't know. I hope that people feel, just, I guess, I think when I enjoy something, it's because I enjoyed just like experiencing the process of going through it, whether, whatever it is, whether it's a game or a movie or a book or anything. And I just hope that at the end of it, that's what people feel, is that they enjoyed the process.
Awesome. Well, and as a last thing, if people wanted to follow you and what you do, where can they find you and where can they find Heartworm?
Yeah, Heartworm is on Steam. You can wishlist it there. It will be coming out in Q1 2025. Uh, so you can look that up. And I am mostly on Twitter. My handle is my last name, which is Adinolfi. Um, Good luck. You can figure out how to spell that one. I'm not going to say it. Uh,
uh,
but yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't post a lot, but Steam is the best place, I think, to keep up with Heartworm updates.
awesome.